Those of you that don't know me, I'm a professor of Work and Organisational Psychology at DCU Business School. I was founding member of the MSc in Work and Organisational Psychology at the DCU Business School back in 1991. So you can take out your calculator and work out, yes, you're right, I started in DCU when I was 7. Okay, so here's the map for what I want to do, review the current context. And that's important. I know you're sort of saying, listen, Finian, we know all about the current context, but I think it's important for us just to reflect on it. And again, good psychological science says that before we step into something, it's useful to stand back and take a proactive approach to it. In other words, to consider what we're stepping into, and gives us a better opportunity to control, or to understand what we control and understand what we cannot control. Then, as I mentioned, I'm going to look at you as a leader in this context as against in the typical office scenario, and then a quick run through the research on what does work, what the evidence tells us about what does work to help workers that are working remotely, and that maybe which we should avoid engaging in. Okay, we're ready to go. So the first thing I want to talk about just is the context. I think it's important that we all realize, every single one of us, every single one of you sitting here, including myself, your families, your dependents, all your co-workers, your friends, your peers in your network, every one of us this morning are suffering more stress than we were a month ago before this all commenced. And that's important for us to understand. Some of us are coping well with it. We're resilient and we're facing the challenge. Others among us are finding it debilitating. We may have dependents that are ill. We may have several children running around us that are not adapting to home life and homeschooling as well as we might have thought. That raises our level of stress, our level of anxiety. And that is something that we need to accept. We need to be aware of it, number one, and accept it, number two. That's not to say that we can't manage it, but what we don't want to do is an ostrich approach to it, which is to deny it. This is not the new normal. This is a phase, okay? People keep saying this is the new normal. We're going through a phase or a cycle in which we have to adapt our behavior, but it's not the new normal. We will be returning to something much closer to our traditional normal soon. So my first message is we're all suffering stress. Your employees, the people you lead and your teams are suffering stress. And you as a leader or a manager need to be aware of your own stress and the fact that they have a higher stress level as well. Now we know from physiological studies, increased stress level depresses and dampens our immune system, makes us more open to all sorts of ailments. But from a psychological point of view and a work point of view, what we need to remember is that if we're suffering stress, our cognitive capacity, our brain power is reduced. So we cannot expect our employees, our teammates, our peers, or those who are reporting to us to work at the same level they were working 1 month ago. So let's get that straight. People are suffering from stress and anxiety. They will not be able to work at the same level they were a month ago. So we need to pull down our expectations in that, just to be aware of that. So that's my first message. It's not a new normal. We're all suffering from a degree of stress. The second is for us to understand that our remote workers, the people that are working, that we are expecting to work from home at the moment, that their readiness and motivation is altered. So they're not the same individuals motivationally as they were one month ago working from the office. Or even those who had the choice of working from home and maybe did so for 1 or 2 days of every week. Right now, this isn't voluntary. There's been an edict issued for most of us to work from home. So the motivational profile is different here. And that means the enthusiasm at which we engage in tasks and the dedication that we can bring to working on various tasks is different to that which we were engaged in 1 month ago. So we're suffering from higher levels of stress. The work we're engaged in, the way we're doing it is not necessarily voluntary for most of us. For some of us, it may well be. We're working from home anywhere. But actually, the vast majority of us, 4 out of every 5 of us, this is quite a new experience to do so 5 days a week, week in, week out. And the third one, I think, for us to consider and to be aware of as leaders is that this is not traditional homeworking. So some of us that are on this webinar this morning will have experienced homeworking in the past, maybe 1 or 2 days a week, or indeed some of us may work from home, for the majority of our working lives or careers. Right now, most of us that are working from home are doing so, as I said, not voluntarily because we have to, but we're doing so in a different context. So we're home with perhaps those that we live with. We may have dependents, we may have children, doing examinations, university examinations, or whatever. So the context is different. It's not like you can send the kids to school and your partner has gone out to work and now I'm engaged in homeworking at my desk at home. Our week is different here. We're sharing the living space with others who have their own rhythm. So I think from a leadership and management point of view, we need to be quite clear on that. This is not homeworking in a traditional sense. It's quite a different experience, and we need to be aware of that as the leaders and managers of employees working from home. So there are my 3 context pieces. I want to share with you just this slide, which is, I'll admit, not science-based, but there is something to it. And what I want to just show you is the difference in work rhythms between a traditional office worker, okay, going into work in the morning, sort of has a cup of coffee, digs into the work, the emails and whatever, and peak performance somewhere mid-morning, takes an hour out for lunch, then maybe a little sluggish back after lunch, but goes back into a work rhythm again and finishes later on in the afternoon. So your performance rhythm might look like this yellow line. But look at the hypothetical purple line for an enforced home worker currently. They may be able to do some in the morning, but maybe mid-morning they have children or dependents that they have to work with on school tasks or whatever it may be. Then there's making lunch and, so the rhythm is going to be entirely different. From a managerial or a leadership point of view, I think this is important for us to be aware of. We can no longer expect or even think about those who are on our teams and working from home to work in a straight line fashion, a 9-to-5 fashion. It is not going to work like that. We've got a punctuated daily rhythm. And for different workers with different home circumstances, this rhythm will be different. So we as managers need to be aware of that. We need to be ready for that. We need to be sensitive to that. And actually, it's one of our jobs to find out how that rhythm looks. And it may not look the same every day. Some home workers at the moment are taking one day where they do maybe child duties or family duties, and the next day they can dedicate to work, or maybe it's a half day. So these are the sort of rhythms that we've got to become aware of. Okay, that's my piece on context. I'm going to move along now to look at you as leaders and get us to think a little bit about the issues that you might consider about yourself before you go on to thinking about how am I going to interact with my employees, with those who report to me. First question is, look, how are you feeling about where we are? In trying to lead people remotely using whether it's Zoom, Skype, or whatever you're using, how do you actually feel about it? Do you feel confident about it? Or does it add to your anxiety? Are you worried? So in other words, get in touch with what you're feeling about your current role and how it has changed, because it has changed. For the vast majority of us, leading virtually means a change to what we're doing. The second point, and for those of you that are graduates of the MSc in Work and Organisational Psychology, or perhaps our Masters in Human Resource Strategies, will have heard me speak about this Carl Dweck's work on facing challenges not as a sort of a performance goal, but rather looking at challenges as an opportunity to learn, to add something to my portfolio. And that's what I would say to all of us as leaders in this situation. Let's not fear what's in front of us. Let's see it as an opportunity, as a sort of a domain in which we've not been skilled before, but in an area in which I can develop new competencies, try new things, and stretch my I suppose leadership profile. Very few of us were appointed or got our current jobs based on our ability to lead remotely. There's not a lot of firms and companies that have that in their set of criteria. But listen, if there is going to be a new normal after this, our firms and our employers may be asking us to do a lot more of this. So really here is the crucible or the opportunity for us to develop our skill set, to push ourselves a little bit further. So treat this as a learning opportunity. Approach it with a degree of excitement rather than fear. That's not to say that it's not anxiety-inducing, but let's use that anxiety positively. To try new things, to go into spaces and into behavior sets, use strategies that perhaps we haven't used before. And for sure, my next point is you're not an expert. There are very few experts out there at leading virtually. Yes, some global firms have recruited for it and trained for it, but for the vast majority of us, this is new. So you're not an expert, that's okay. And there's nothing to be lost by saying, look, this is new to me when you're talking to your employees. I'm not quite sure how this is going to work, but let's see, let's learn together. Let's engage in this and make the best of it. And my final point on this is you cannot, and I emphasize this, you cannot and will not transfer the same set of strategies, the same set of approaches that you'd use in the office to an online setting. It won't work. They're just not congruent. Now, I'm not asking or suggesting that you become a different person. You do need to remain authentic, but you will have to think a little bit differently about how you interact and behave with those who are reporting to you and those that you are leading. The context is different. You know, you can't put your arm around somebody and go for a cup of coffee. You can't have a walk at lunchtime with them. These sort of things have gone off our agenda. Whatever your strategies or approaches were, they're no longer present for you or available for you. So the idea is not to step back and say, okay, well, then I can't really do what I used to do. The challenge really is for us to step up, to try new things, to overcome the challenges that we see before us. So that's my few minutes on asking us to stop and think about ourselves, to self-reflect, which is enormously important for good leaders, to constantly reflect on what you're doing and how you're doing it. Let's take a step on from that. I'd like you to be aware that the research has informed us that there are some paradoxes that are associated with leading remote workers. And you can see the reference here from Bernie Lach and Ellen Kosak in the bottom right-hand corner. This is some really good, they're good researchers, have been researching this area and continue to publish right up until quite recently on the area of managing remote workers. But they've identified some issues that I think are important for leaders and managers of remote workers to be aware of. The idea is that all of our research tells us that remote workers, given the right supports and the right leadership, actually outperform co-located or people in the office. Now, that may seem like a sort of a surprising piece of evidence, but it has been supported again and again. In fact, we have meta-analyses that prove this fact. Employees who want to work from home, who have the correct support to work from home, and supportive leadership while they are working from home actually outperform those who are in the office. And when we boil that down, why is that? Well, it's because they've been given autonomy to, I suppose, schedule the work when they want to do it, how they want to do it, at times that suits them. So it seems to be that they can balance family and other competing issues with their work time issues, and they can schedule it that makes for, ultimate satisfaction or optimal satisfaction for them. That is an interesting situation. It may not be true in the current situation because, again, many of us are working from home, not in a voluntary capacity. We would much prefer to be doing what we're doing back at the office, but we cannot do so. But there is no doubt that giving people autonomy to do the work according to their own rhythm, even sometimes to do it in the way that they see best, has positive effects, positive performance effects. It's effectively what we're saying to employees is, you know your own context best. So will you craft a way of delivering what is needed for the firm, given your understanding of your context? And that's the opposite to being a controlling manager. It's saying to the employee, actually, you're leading yourself, and I'm not going to lead, I'll just check in on you. That's frightening for some of us because maybe at month's end, weekend, month's end, or quarter end, we have to deliver the results for our team or for our project, whatever it may be. We have to deliver it up along in the organization. And this idea of losing control can be, a little anxiety inducing, but don't fear it. In the leading virtual teams, it's as I say, it's a paradox that we have to engage with. Giving over control, actually, in a way, can give you back better performance. The second point that Brenda Lash and Ellen Kozak and co-researchers have found is that there's a bit of a conflict, or a contradiction sometimes, between managing teams and managing individuals within the team. And this is definitely where managing virtually and leading virtually can take more effort. There is no doubt about that. It's easy sometimes to bring a team together in an office in a co-located situation and quickly thrash out a problem or a challenge. Much more tricky and much more challenging to do that in a virtual setting. So what it means is, yes, we should have team meetings, and we should have a structure to those and a sort of a system, a briefing as to how they would work. But sometimes we really do need to supplement our team meetings with one-to-one meetings also. So be ready for that. Although everybody appears at a team meeting once a week, twice a week, whatever it may be, you are going to have to put some more effort into contacting individual team members for one-to-ones in the background. And those one-to-ones are absolutely essential because, as I'll speak about in a moment, it's those one-to-ones that connect the employees at an individual level with yourself, give you the opportunity to understand what their challenges are, what motivational issues they may be facing, but it also gives you a chance to understand any anxieties they have, or indeed really good ideas that they may have. But it gives you that opportunity to connect one-to-one with them. So let me advance a little bit on that and speak a little bit about what you need to consider about the people who are reporting to you. So in this virtual world, do you know what motivates each of them now that they are at home, perhaps with the dependents, or maybe they have somebody in the family that is ill, maybe indeed even suffering from the virus, or those within their immediate social network that are so. Do you understand where they are motivationally right now? And I think that's something that a remote leader, a remote manager needs to get a handle on. You can't ask these questions really in an open Zoom team meeting with 8 or 10 individuals attending it. I think you can gain some insight into that, but I actually think for most of us, we need to move to the one-to-one approach to have that discussion and conversation with our reports to try and understand that. Working virtually, working through Zoom or Skype or whatever it may be, WebEx, is easier for some. Some of us just love it. It's terrific. We spend all our time on FaceTime or whatever social media forum that we subscribe to, and it's completely natural to us. For others among us, perhaps the introverts, this takes a lot of effort, and taking effort means it burns our energy, our psychic energy, our psychological energy, if you want. And remember what I said earlier, all of us, every single one of us listening to this webinar, you are all suffering a degree of stress higher than what you were 1 month ago. And that reduces our psychic energy. So these online fora can be challenging for people who are introverted, or certainly to speak up and have the camera shine on them for a prolonged period of time can be something really that they would step away from. So my question to you as leaders and managers of employees that are working and reporting to you virtually is, do you have a sort of in your head a pen picture or a personality picture of those on your team? Are there individuals in there that you're not hearing much from and others that you're hearing a lot from? So if the answer to that is yes, you need a strategy or you need an approach to overcome that, because we need to hear everybody's voice if we're going to, from a team particularly, if we're going to have optimal performance. There are those in your team that like a lot of guidance, check-ins. You know, they're anxious to see that they want to do things right. They want to ensure that they're doing it correctly, that they're doing it the way it should be done or at the pace that it should be done. So they will look to you to just to verify and to give feedback. And others are really autonomous workers. They say, okay, I've got the project's description. I'm off to work on that, and I'll speak to you next Friday, or I'll speak to you next Friday week. I'm pretty confident I'll have it done, and I really don't need to communicate with you between now and then. So the needs of these two individuals, or two different types of individuals, they're radically different. And again, as leaders and managers, this is the sort of challenge that we have, is we need to tune into this, to become aware of it, and then to work on it, obviously. My final point here is just, and I think I've mentioned this already, is do you know among your working team who wants a lot of autonomy versus those who don't? And actually, let me progress this autonomy piece, because in my next slide, what I want to do, and this is perhaps for those of us on the webinar who have forgotten about what we've learned about work motivation in the past, I'm going to take a minute or two just to do a precis or a work motivation 101 reminder. And here, I'm not speaking about Maslow or anything like that. I'm really referring to probably the most widely used, adapted and validated work motivation model that there is, and that's self-determination theory. And that really talks about the differences between people being motivated from an extrinsic point of view, that's getting rewards or positive feedbacks, bonuses, all sorts of public adulation. So they're all extrinsic motivators. But we know that in the workplace, though, extrinsic motivators are fine for short-term goals, but for longer-term goals and creative goals, we need to step into the zone of intrinsic motivation. And intrinsic motivation has 3 buttons. And these are the 3 buttons that all of us are, I suppose, ruled by when it comes to intrinsic motivation. For those of us that really like our work, we want to be challenged. That's the competency piece. We want to show that we can not just do our work, but we can stretch ourselves in the work, and we constantly seek to challenge ourselves, to learn new things, to become absolutely proficient at what we do, and then perhaps to move on to the next level. So an intrinsic motivator is really interesting work that uses my abilities, my intellect, my competency portfolio. And if my work allows me to do that, then that's 1/3 of the way along the road of being intrinsically motivated. The second one is autonomy, that most of us who like to be intrinsically motivated like to do work, like to have some control over our work, not to be told what to do, how to do it, when to do it, and told when we've got it right and we haven't got it right. We like to have that sense of like not just control, but a real input on the decision-making piece. We feel empowered really about how we're doing our work. So that's the autonomy piece. This is a really, really important one, and lots of research on this showing that where leaders give employees the opportunity to do their work, to craft the work in the way that they want. In other words, okay, Padraig, okay, Sharon, here's the work. We want you to work on innovating a new service system, but what I want you to do is to work on it in the way that you see best. that you craft the way that you want to work on that, and can you come back to me in a week with what you found on that? So that's giving that individual really an open space, almost like a blank sheet to begin to deliver on that global goal that you've given them. We find that really opens up creativity and innovation. The third point on our Work Motivation 101 from an intrinsic motivation perspective is that all of us want to be involved in work where there is some purpose. Now, that's not to say that somebody that's, that's the caretaker or the security guard in a large organization that's involved in really creative stuff, that they don't see a purpose. Organizations are made up of loads of individuals who are contributing in small ways to the overall purpose of that organization. And this is important, I think, for us to get a sense of the meaning of what we're engaged in. This latter one, I think, is really important for us as leaders of remote and virtual teams. We need to keep that big picture in the minds of our employees and our reports. It can get lost in the middle of what we're going through currently. So don't be afraid at some stage, particularly if you're using weekly check-in meetings, just at the beginning when you're giving an overview of where we are for this week, to remind the people on the team what our purpose is, what we're all striving to contribute to here, so that you keep a focus on that. I'm watching my time, so I'm going to move along. That's my 101 work motivation piece. But what I want to come back to here is that all of our workers, all of your self-reports, they're all feeling challenged. And really, when we look at and we pull together the research from probably the last 10 or 15 years on leading remote workers or virtual workers, there's one theme that comes up again and again and again, with reference to leadership effectiveness. And that is, if your remote workers feel that you trust them and they can trust you, then performance is enhanced. So trust in this scenario is really, it's a primary issue. And that's where I want to spend about 5 minutes. And I'm going to share with you on one slide, try to pull together all of the research that we have on how do you influence remote workers, virtual workers, whether they're individuals or working in a team, how do you influence their trust and ensure that they feel trusted and that they trust you in a virtual setting. And this is what I call my slide is zipping up trust. And I'm breaking trust down into two factors, okay? So on the one hand, people trust individuals. They trust you if they feel that you are caring, that you're concerned for them, and that you're warm towards them. Okay, so that's on the affective side or the emotional side. And they will trust you if they can see that you are relatively competent. You don't have to be Superman or Superwoman, but that you're relatively competent to lead the team. That doesn't mean you have to be better than everybody else in the team, but that you are competent. I suppose the other end of that is versus incompetent, and that you're relatively reliable. So really, our trust piece is made up of two foci. How am I working on helping my reports, my remote workers to feel that I care for them? And how am I working on influencing their perceptions of my reliability or competence? Now, I'm going to split the research because a lot of research here, but I'm going to split it up into two subfoci. So working with your remote workers, I'm going to take a task or a project-focused set of cues under warmth and care, and then a personal or an interpersonal set of cues under warmth and care. So first, how do we transfer this sense of my caring as a leader? Well, you give them support, as much support as you can. You give them autonomy. You say, look, Sharon, I'm really confident in what you can do. Are you confident in taking on this project? And if they're matching that, then say, okay, well, why don't you run with that and come back to me if you have a problem, but you sort of craft out what you're going to do on this project. I'm here for you. Come back at any stage you want to, but I'm going to let you work on that at your pace, and let me know when you think it would be really useful for us to touch base again. So that's giving autonomy, but also keeping the support piece there in the background. You need to be honest and you need to be transparent. Sometimes things won't go correctly. Things are not maybe going well in the firm. Listen, be honest and upfront about that. You're dealing with educated individuals. They have enough on their plate without somebody keeping information from them. Be open and honest. That they'll know when you're being open and honest, and that will feed into their perception of you as a caring individual who's not hiding anything. That integrity is high on your list. So these are just 3 things. Take your own meaning for them in your own context that pay into or contribute to warmth and care. excuse me, under under a task or a project focus. Let's look at the interpersonal. So how do you, when you're dealing interpersonally with team members, how do you sort of display and portray your caring side and your the fact that you're you have an interest and a warmth towards your employees? So try to be caring. So how do you do that? You ask them, how is it going for them? You ask questions like that. How are you finding this working from home? Where do you find the challenges? Are there things that are working well for you? So are you finding some things just really impossible? You know, where are your stress levels? So these are important personal or interpersonal questions that you can ask individuals that open up a conversation to a different level. They let them know that you're not here just to hear about how the project is going, to tick a box in terms of performance management. Rather, you're interested in hearing about the challenges that they're feeling, how they're managing this really strange scenario that we're all going through. And there's no harm in here in you sharing your situation with them, saying, yeah, listen, yesterday I had an hour and a half's work to do, but the whole, you know, the wheels came off the wagon because whatever happened at home, and we're all facing these sort of interruptions to our scheduled lives at the moment. So I think sharing them makes you more human and sees that you're facing these challenges as well. So I'm going to move to the other side of my my hoodie, to the competence and reliability side, and I'm going to do the same here. So how can you as a leader and a manager just pay attention to the cues that you may be giving under a task heading from a competence perspective, and then from a personal or a team-related interpersonal heading. So let's look at the task first. People read this very quickly. If you're conscientious about your work, if you're reliable in that, look, we're going to have meetings once every 3 days, 2 days, whatever it may be, and that I'm going to have this done for you by that time. You know, that people watch that carefully. People delivering. Are you delivering on your deliverables? Do you set up the stuff that you're supposed to set up, be it Zoom calls, Skype calls, whatever it may be? Are you making the resources available to them that they require? Maybe it's something from a firm perspective that they need resources to help them with the online connectivity, whatever it may be. So you need to appear, or you need to show that you are conscientious about your role. You need to obviously be knowledgeable, and given that you're in a leadership position, you probably have more insight and information about how the firm is doing than they do. So don't be afraid of sharing that. This is important for them to understand the context also. I think where you need to be competent and show your competence is when you're assigned responsibility. This comes back to an earlier slide. So do you know your employees? Do you know those who work well alone? And do you know those who work really well in teams, or in dyads, in twos, or whatever it may be? So be clever about that. Put some thought into this. And this is maybe where you use your one-on-ones with your employees that you're doing in between team meetings, where you'll just ask them, would you prefer to work directly with somebody on this project, or is this something you'd like to take on your own? Continue to be as open as you can. Integrity in these situations and this sort of a context is really, really important. We're all trying to pick up Cues that typically we can pick up quite easily by looking at our leaders and managers across the table, in the hallways, at the coffee machine, in the canteen, wherever it may be. But we don't get those cues anymore. All we're doing is looking at images on Skype or maybe on telephone calls. So we place more importance on some cues, and we tend to jump to conclusions. So you need to be quite open, maybe a bit more open and frank than you would be in a normal back in the office scenario. And try to be consistent in your approach. In other words, set up a week and your set of communications in a consistent way. A really nice one is, let's have a sort of what's sometimes called a channel graph or a channel map. We text each other when something is really urgent. We have phone calls. When things are less urgent, we do Zooms twice a week, almost like a matrix of communication approaches that we're all aware of, almost like we color code them. These are texting is for reds, and we expect a response within an hour, whereas emails within 2 hours or 3 hours or whatever it may be, and then other communications in other ways. So try and set up a sort of a consistent communication pattern. So they're just some ideas. Again, I'd like you to look at these and take your own meanings for them in your own context. I'm aware that some of us are coming from the service sector, some from manufacturing, from quite different sectors. So you have to translate these phrases and these prompts. And really, they're not just phrases and prompts. Remember, this is research evidence that I'm quoting to you here. You need to translate them to your own setting. So finally, on this rather full slide, I'm going to look at personal and team-related issues under that heading of competence and reliability. So being proactive as a leader, in other words, seeing things before they happen, can be an important cue for developing the employees or the virtual team leaders' sense of trust in your competence and your reliability. And in a way, most of us are already, we have the bigger picture as leaders and managers. Maybe not the complete bigger picture, we don't have all the answers, but we do know about stuff that's going on in other areas, so that can help us be proactive and think ahead a little bit. And again, look, if we're leaders and managers, our job is to think a little bit more strategically than those who are beneath us in the organization. So we need to continue that strategic cap-wearing or hat-wearing role here as well. So my colleague Craig Crossley in the University of Central Florida has done some fantastic research on the impact of humor among virtual team members. He thinks it's really, and he's shown actually, his research has shown that humor actually does contribute significantly to employees' perception of the competence and reliability of leaders who are leading virtually and remotely. So don't be afraid to, have self-deprecating humor about, and not too, obviously in this current situation, not too black, but just, think about introducing humor to the scenario. It has an interesting impact on employees. They feel much more comfortable when the tension and the ice is broken by a little bit of humor. Look, some of us are not naturally humorous, so I'm not saying that you'll reach immediately to the Christmas cracker joke book, but just consider it as something in the background and encourage. Maybe some of your team members are naturally humorous, when they are being humorous, once it's not aimed at any other individual, celebrate that as well. It's useful to have a laugh. Make yourself feedback friendly, whether that's feedback about your leadership, but more important, that you want to hear the nuts and bolts of what's going on from each one of your team members or each of your individuals. It's trickier in this sort of a context to elicit feedback. You can't see what people are doing. All the other cues that you might normally rely on may not be available to you. So you need to actually go and search sometimes of feedback and input from your employees. So do that. Put that on your agenda. I have to up my game on seeking feedback. And all of what I've been talking about for the last 15 minutes or so is about being much more participative. And that's a challenge for some of us. Some of you have heard me say this before. I'm naturally more an introverted individual. So dealing with people online, eliciting information, asking questions of them is not something I'd normally do. I'd be more, typically would be more reflective and a listener. And sure, you need to listen as a remote leader, as a virtual leader. But I found myself with teams that I'm working with where I've had to step up and actually articulate and ask questions a lot more than I would have in the past. Otherwise, I'm missing really, really important information. Okay, we're beginning to come towards the close of what I wanted to present to you this morning, and then we'll open it up for questions. So a quick synopsis of what you should do. Your job really is to make your remote workers, those who report to you, is to make their job of doing their work, doing their project a little bit easier. So that's primarily your aim. Your aim is not to direct them, it is not to control them, it is to help them to do their work, to make it easier in whatever way you can. Now that's a different agenda, maybe subtly different for some of us, maybe significantly different for many of us from what we would do in the traditional office setting. But keep it in the back of your mind when you're speaking with your reports. How do I help make it easier for Sharon? How do I help make it easier for John? You need to engage more than usual. Establish a routine as best as possible, and that's not your routine, but a routine that fits your team or fits your employees. And then try to be consistent in sticking to that, because remember what we learned earlier, if you're consistent, that builds their trust in you as a leader and a manager. We do need to be a little bit careful on this one. Communicating online and digitally, as we all know from Twitter and other digital fora, sometimes the meaning can get lost. You need to put a little bit of extra emphasis on this, particularly on decisions. So when a decision is made with a team or with an individual, there's no harm in going back and saying, okay, let's just have a look at, we have decided to do X with customer Y, and you're going to make the 2 phone calls to her, and then I'm going to follow up with, so in other words, you outline what the steps are so that the instructions or the decisions that we have made are articulated clearly, that we all understand the action points. And really this is just from a clarity point of view, and so that we don't waste anybody's time, that somebody isn't coming back to us tomorrow with a clarification, with 24 hours of time wasted. In the office, we can do that much quicker with a head around the door or a quick question on the corridor. We don't have that luxury now, so we do need to be a little bit clearer in how we communicate our instructions, but particularly decisions that are made. Your job, as I mentioned above, is to make it easier. You coach and encourage where possible. You need to involve all voices. So if you hear somebody if you see somebody as being a bit more silent than others, then now part of your role is to get that voice recorded. And that voice may be the voice of innovation. It may be that individual that's a little bit shy, but has terrific ideas, but is just slow in this forum to articulate them. Whereas they might be able to do so back in the office in many different ways. Just this forum isn't suiting them. Now that's your role. Your role is to go there, unlock that, and get that back into the mix. Very quickly, let's look at some things that you should avoid. While I mentioned earlier that we need to be crystal clear in our communication, this does not mean cutting out small talk. We need the storytelling, we need the narratives, we need the jokes to break the tension, to create the trust, to create the climate among a group of virtual employees, so that we come some bit closer to recreating the sort of a forum we could have in a meeting room back at the office. So be careful if we're trying to ensure that our decisions are crystal clear and our communication is clear, but that doesn't mean at the risk of cutting out small talk. Our storytelling, our jokes, our small talk is still important. Work will not be linear. That's for sure. I showed you a graph earlier of the rhythm. The rhythm will be different, and we actually know from some recent research about rhythms that most online work and the most creative online work actually happens in bursts, where people get together and cross-communicate in short intervals that really pushes the project on. And it's actually a recognized in software development. It's a recognized feature of innovation and creativity. This short bursts of intense activity followed by latent periods. So if you expect the work to be done in a linear fashion, then you're fooling yourself. You're being somewhat naive. Think of this as happening in rhythms. So in the background, there may be nothing happening. There may be short bursts of activity. You can't expect every 2 hours, every 4 hours, every day, a linear pattern of performance. So get your headset, get your mindset into thinking about that. You are not the expert. You are not all-knowing. And I think just being authentic about that is important. That you say, actually, I don't know the answer to that. Does anybody else in the team know it? Where can we find out or gain some insight into that? You know, showing that sort of vulnerability, knowing the limits of your competence actually elevates your employees' trust in you, because they're going, he knows or she knows the limits of their ability. This is important. I can trust this person because they know when to step out and ask somebody else or lean on somebody else rather than being delusional about their abilities. And an important thing, and this is back from a psychological perspective, back to attribution theory. Look, if you're not getting responses or performance doesn't seem to be coming from somebody, don't make the assumption that they are slacking. Actually go the other way. Think there could be 4 or 5 different things that explain this. Let's wait and see what the problem is. And you'll find most of the time that there's a legitimate excuse or reason why that person has not been reporting. So don't go on the control hat. Understand people are under pressure. We are prone to make attributions and assumptions sometimes when work isn't coming through at the speed that we wanted to. And I'm asking you to just at the current time, suspend your attributions, suspend your assumptions, and wait and see what the real story is. Okay, I've moved to a period where it's time for questions, and Caroline, I know, has been curating the chat. I know I've gone a little bit over my time, but I'm going to ask Caroline as I just see if I can switch screen.
Yeah, that's it. Can you hear me, Finian?
I can hear you, Caroline.
Perfect. Great, yeah. Yeah, so we're all set then. Just wanted to thank everybody for bearing with us at the start when we had just a little tech issue going on in the background. So thanks to those of you who were waiting patiently to enter the webinar and for things to kick off. That was fantastic, Finian, incredibly informative, very insightful, and I'm sure practical for those of us on the line today in navigating these very strange, if not stressful times. Very nice that you've got a branded mug, and that's a nice touch. So a couple of questions coming through here for you on the live chat. One is about overwhelm among managers. So while managers are looking out for people in their teams and they're trying to facilitate one-to-one dialogue with team members, that's I guess eating into a lot of time.
Yes.
That managers would otherwise be using on project work or on quiet work at their desk. And just somebody here on the line noticing that there's a sense of overwhelm among particularly senior leaders who are trying to keep all of the ships afloat at the moment. Would you have any comment on that?
Yeah, no, it's a really, really interesting point. And it's a point, again, that we've seen in the research. There's a couple of things obviously contributing to this. You know, pulling 4 or 5 people together and having a meeting for 25, 30 minutes, we can solve a problem or a challenge. And clearly that's not possible now, because getting 5, 6, 7, 8 people together at any one time for a Zoom call or a Skype or whatever media you're using just isn't it's not as manageable, I guess. So it means that a lot of leaders and managers are having to do a lot of one-on-ones, and that's time consuming. And listen, what we're doing right at this moment, communicating like this, this takes energy, this takes concentration. Doing one-on-ones digitally is more tiring. a psychological perspective and from an emotional perspective, much more tiring than doing so sitting over a coffee in the canteen. So I agree wholeheartedly. There is no golden key to the problem that the participant has articulated. What I am imploring leaders and managers to understand is that we can't continue to do in the current situation. We can't continue to manage and lead in the way that we did 1 month ago. You can't replicate that. We need to come down a gear. Everybody needs to come down a gear. We just can't be replicated, and we need to understand the parameters, I suppose, of our ability. One thing that the research has suggested on this is that where you have teams, that you give them more authority to be self-managing and self-leading. So you break larger teams up into dyads, so you buddy individuals within teams, so that Finian and Caroline become a sort of a mentoring pair. So rather than everything coming back to the leader or the manager, Finian and Caroline as a dyad within the team try and work out their own challenges and problems. So it takes some of that upwardly directed questioning and needs. It dilutes that a little bit. So that's one approach or one technique that research would say that might lighten the load. But in honesty, I really do think the important one is that's the context piece. We cannot continue to work at the level and at the rate and at the level of effectiveness, manage and lead rather at the level of effectiveness that we could in a pre-COVID-19 scenario. We need to let go of that.
Yeah, it's a major shift in people's expectations around how much they or their team or their broader work environment can actually achieve at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got one more here. Just you referenced controlling managers or managers that may have that, whether they realize it or not, that micromanager in them. And their desire maybe to have very clear insight into what their team are up to at any given moment, and maybe an element of suspicion when they don't have that instantaneous feedback and that face-to-face and that clear visibility. So what can a manager do if they have that instinct and they very clearly need to dial that down quite a bit at the moment?
Yeah, so again, the research very clear on this is if you're working virtually and remotely, you need, as a manager, you need to reduce the level of control that you're used to having, and that you need to give that autonomy and space. You cannot micromanage. It will actually only sour the scenario because there's so little of the interpersonal cues that are available. You can't see what a person is doing, that you do almost have to trust them. So what I would say is you need to come to DCU to one of our executive education programs where we look at how do I become a more trusting manager? How do I move away from the old command and control, the old authoritarian approach? That's really, really necessary in a digital setting. So it is a mind shift. That's why I started with the context piece and started with the know yourself piece. You need to almost diagnose what have I done normally, and now switch across to, look, this probably won't work here, so I do need a new set of behaviors, I do need a new set of strategies. And really, if that individual is asking for a pointer, go to my hoodie zip trust slide. The answers are there. That's how you behave in a trustworthy way. That's how you deliver trust to your employees. Those are the cues that you need to pay attention to.
Okay, thank you, Finian. The last one is just on the point about trust. So, say trust hasn't been clearly established in a team, or it was always a little bit shaky, or say you've got a new hire who you don't have a very clear sense of. How do you go about navigating a scenario like that while also trying to contend with remote working?
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? So our research, the trust research team at DCU, Linda van der Werf and myself have looked at new hire adjustment in organizations and into teams, and we've looked at in particular the cues and the behaviors that influence their trust in that first couple of weeks, first couple of days, then weeks, and then months. And there's a series of things going on that in a day-to-day, in a natural office setting, we can pick up on all sorts of cues that feed our understanding of whether this individual or manager or leader is trustworthy or not. And some of these are absent now. So I think definitely from a managerial perspective, if you've got a new hire, somebody new on the team, you got to take it offline, and you've got to have a couple of one-to-ones which are maybe not really a strict agenda set to them, but a sort of get to know me type of scenario. Where are you coming from? What's your history? How are you feeling about joining the group? What way do you like to work? What ways do you not like to work? So almost having that small talk, chit chat, almost like a first step into a coaching type a relationship. So you have that without a work-based agenda. And what I mean by that is whatever the task of the project or their role is, but rather what works for them best in this situation. So take it offline, have a one-to-one, invest the time in it. Two 20-minute or 30-minute face-to-faces on Zoom could pay real dividends in the long term.
Is there anything that you think a person should be aware of if they're about to make a new hire, but that person hasn't started yet, or would you apply the same advice?
I think it's the same advice. Go back to my Zip Trust slide and look at all the bullet points there. These are the things that we need to have in our minds. But those things that we have in our minds for when we behave and interact with our employees, they're actually the things we look for in our employees as well. So if we're going to trust the employee, many of those cues, many of those behaviors are the sort of things that feed our perception of whether we can trust the employee. So if you're having that one-to-one, then interrogating some of those areas would be something that I would suggest. So that trust piece is reciprocal. In other words, how my reports view me are filtered through those cues that I showed you on the Zip slide, but how I trust my employees and my reports, I also view them through those behaviors and cues.
Great. Okay, Finian, we've got two last questions before we finish.
Sure.
One is making the point that the business model and approach has changed so much. How will people be affected psychologically when we're back to working in an office? And any advice for, when we're eventually, hopefully at that point where business as usual resumes, so to speak, how can you prepare your team for going back into an office environment, having operated like this for potentially a very long period?
Yeah, to be honest, firms have been through this. Maybe some, I'm thinking Hurricane Katrina, things like that. We may have some evidence to draw on. And our colleagues in the US, certainly around some of the Center for Disease Control research, have some models, I suppose, that might guide us on that. It might be a really interesting webinar to hold in the future for me to go and look at the research that's extant in this area, because it probably is something that all firms will face. But what I would say immediately, one thing I am quite sure of, is that on return to office, we don't expect everybody to go back behind their desk and continue with functioning as they did prior to March 16th or whatever date you broke up in your country for this sort of lockdown. We need a town hall. So this is where leadership steps up. On our first day back, it needs all employees coming together if that is possible, if we're not all physically distancing ourselves or socially distancing ourselves. But there definitely needs to be a sort of a town hall where leaders step up. They characterize what has happened over the previous month, 2 months, 3 months, however long this will last, the effect it has had on the firm in terms of whatever service productivity. Some firms have completely closed down, others are managing to function at some level, but to characterize that, because not all employees will understand that. To celebrate the input of employees in keeping the firm going, if that has been the case, in trying circumstances where people have sometimes put the firm beyond their own personal needs and wants at certain stages, but then to try and chart the road back. So we don't have a firm absolute sat-nav for this, but this is what we think is the approach we're going to take over the coming days, the coming weeks, and that we're open to listening to all teams and all individuals to see that we can get that right. Of that, I'm sure that leadership piece becomes significantly important on return.
Okay, that's great, Finian. Thank you. Our final question, I think it's a really important one, is from Jacqueline, asking if you have any thoughts on trying to manage teams in a scenario where some of the team have been laid off temporarily.
Yeah, no, this is a really important one. I'm sort of conscious that I'm talking and have spoken all the way through about, leading teams that are working from home, even if it's not voluntary in that it's enforced. But I'm also conscious that for some of us, our teams have been downsized significantly, and there'll be some people that may be returning to work that are furlonged, that will be returning to work in a month or two's time, but they have been laid off in the interim. And there's a bit of remediation to be done here. This is real important trust-loaded communication with those individuals. If they're coming back, I've always taken the approach, and this goes right back to the crisis here in the Republic of Ireland from 2008 to 2011, is that employers and leaders need to be crystal clear and open with individuals that they are letting go. This is why this is happening. We don't want it to happen. We would like to have other ways of managing this, but being absolutely crystal clear as to why the downsizing has occurred, and backing that up hopefully with a promise that the second we are back in the saddle, you are the individuals that we're going to bring back, and we're committed to working with you. So I think that sort of communication at the outset is important. But people will be hurt, okay? They will be maybe even experiencing a little bit of a trust breach if they have been laid off. And I think there's a sort of a trust repair piece to be engaged in here. Now, it's a whole other webinar in itself. And again, myself and some of my colleagues in the trust research group here at DCU have done a lot of work on trust repair. But let me say that without going through the 6 or 7 points that you probably need to consider, the one essential point that you need to step up to with regard to trust repair is to be absolutely straight and tell the story from your perspective, saying, look, first I apologize. This hurt you. I understand it hurt you. It made your life difficult. It increased your anxiety levels. All the things that the person who has been laid off is experiencing. You need to empathize with that. And although you may not feel responsible for doing it, from their perspective, you are responsible for doing it. So you need to own that responsibility and say, yes, I'm responsible for doing it. Let me please explain why this happened. It's not something that I wanted to do, but here were the circumstances. And that you move to at least giving the story from your perspective while understanding their experience. That's the first step. But Caroline, there's about 6 steps that we have to go through. I'm looking at the time, and I don't think most of our webinar participants have the time to hang with us until 1 o'clock. But maybe we'll do a webinar sometime later on in this to help those leaders and managers who've had to let employees go on how they might manage that transition back in, and if trust has been breached, how it might be repaired, because there's a whole set of models and evidence that might inform us on that.
That's great, Finian. Thanks. I'm really surprised to see that most people are actually still on the line, so I think that's a really good sign.
People have nothing better to do at their time.
I'm sure they do, but I'm hoping that it means that everybody has just found this very useful, as I'm sure they have. We've got a mix, obviously, of people on the line today from our alumni community, from friends of DCU, from some of our executive education companies. Our aim at the moment within the business school is just to try to be useful to people, to try and provide you with information that would be of value to you personally, and also to the company that you're working with. Huge thanks to Finian. I think that we're very lucky to have someone like Finian with us today, sharing his insights. And I do hope that we can have another webinar fairly soon. Please keep in touch over our LinkedIn account. We're going to be circulating these slides afterwards, and we'll also share the recording with everybody that's tuned in. So that will be available to you, and we'll also share a link with you where you can, if you're an alum of DCU, you can update your contact details to make sure that you're receiving this information through to your email, so that we have every best chance of reaching you. Finian, I don't
Thank you.
have anything else to
Yeah,
add there.
can I close up if you're finished? First of all, to thank everybody. It's been a really nice experience, but really positive from our perspective at DCU. Also, to give back. It's important. We feel somewhat sort of ineffective at times. It's certainly in the executive education realm of not being able to reach directly to our executive education clients and participants. So it was nice, hopefully, that you found this useful. Certainly, it stimulated me to think more deeply about the challenges that you're facing. On the slide deck, my contact details are on a slide. I won't bring it back up now, on one of the final slides. And for those, I know we have a couple of students that have logged in as well, that may be doing some research or looking to do papers on this area. My last slide is a set of references, academic references, all from top-tier journals that support what I've been going through for the last 55 minutes or so. So please find those available as well. My contact details are also on a slide there. So I'd be delighted to interact individually with anybody that would like to do so. I do know from an executive education perspective that this day next week we have Brendan Benchy, who is one of our presenters on our Global for Growth program, which is for Irish SMEs. He's doing a webinar for us looking at financial strategy in the current situation, which I think might be really relevant to SME owners. And really what he's focusing on that is the problems you may be having with cash flow. Brendan is so experienced in this area. I saw him do this webinar last week. It's a really, really valuable one. So for those on our SME client list, we'll be hitting you with the details of that over the next couple of days. Thank you so much.